And I asked Toby, I said, Toby, man, what the hell are these kids doing out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? And he said, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. And he said, don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. And when he said that, it was just like a smack in the face. And I came out of it, and I was absolutely terrified.
Holy mackerel, that can't be aircraft. There actually is a large unidentified object circling the Earth at incredible speed.
Naturally, we are very curious to know where it is you come from.
I had no intention of ever telling this story. I thought that my wife and I would keep it just between ourselves. And I retired on January 1st, 2012, and we moved to Dallas because we have adult children here and grandchildren. So, I love Vermont, but why stay there? I can be near my kids and grandkids. So, yeah, here we are. But yeah, in October of that year, I had pain in my right knee. So I went to I get all my medical care from the Veterans Administration. So I went to the VA hospital. They x-rayed my knee. And when they did, they found two anomalies, one above my knee and one below my knee. And the one above my knee, the radiologist actually came down and looked at the x-rays, which is very uncommon. Normally they throw your x-rays in a stack and they get read later. But the radiologist was dumbfounded that he couldn't find a scar over where this thing was located, because he said, you can't violate the integrity of the skin and bury this thing that deep into fascia without there being a scar, and there is no scar. And the second thing that struck me was I was a runner for 40 years, and every time I would hit the 2-mile mark in my run, give or take 50 yards, that spot directly above where that object was located would go completely numb. You could stick a pin in it, and I could delineate the edges of it. It was perfectly round and about the size of a $50. Asked my doctor, what about this? She says, it's probably a histemic reaction. She said I wouldn't worry about it. So I didn't. But when I saw the x-rays, it struck me that this thing lay directly underneath what I called that numb spot when I was in my run. And it validated, 40 years of nightmares, that these things did actually put their hands on me. And that just kind of was a shove over the edge. I knew that for my own sanity and peace of mind, I needed to write about it, that at some level it was important, and I needed to tell people about it. So that was the catalyst to write the book.
Sure. And, going back to 1977, you're at, I believe, Whitman Air Force Base, correct?
Yes, Whitman
Air Force Base. And just kind of a, in your words and however succinctly or briefly or however much you want to elaborate on this, what were the events that really prompted you to, write the book? And I know there's some things we can touch on before and after, but what was the main event that really, shook you to your core?
The main event was my abduction. A friend and I, a coworker, I was an enlisted guy. I was an NCO. I worked in the emergency room at Whitman Air Force Base as a first responder and an EMT. And my friend I refer to as Toby, he and I worked together on the night shift for 3 years. And we were just kind of the perfect match, as far as people to work with. And it's unusual to find somebody you can work with that you can get along with. And he was kind of, he was just a good guy to work with. We were best of friends, and we were both married, living on base in NCO housing at the time. And our wives were best of friends. And on our off days, we'd barbecue, play cards, do something like that. So he came up to me in April of 1977 and asked, he says, hey man, I got a great idea. Let's go camping. And I'm like, camping? Are you nuts? I said, look, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I know I've never been camping in my life. You're from Flint, Michigan, and I suspect you've never been camping in your life. So, what's this all about? And, he had a pretty good argument organized in his head. And he said, look, he knew that I was an amateur photographer. I had a little dark room set up in my house at home. I had a nice new Yashica camera with a set of lenses and all the toys and stuff. And I really wanted to try them out. But when you live on a nuclear base, there's not a lot you can do with a camera. So he said, yeah, he says, we can go down here. We can, you can photograph wildlife. And he wanted to just watch the night sky. He was just ate up with everything to do with cosmology, astronomy. And he was really a gifted mathematician. Like me, he didn't have the money or the wherewithal to go to college right out of high school. So he was there for the same reason I was, to get the GI Bill. He had taken some classes on basic physics and, aced them all. He was a smart kid. And I wish we'd have had time, and we had time together to discuss where his interest in the night sky, what was the origin of that. But we never had that conversation. So June came around and we went to Devil's Den State Park, which was a 6.5-hour drive south. And we had pre-planned to dodge the ranger station and try to find this plateau that this guy had told Toby about, right? So we're on a paved road. And in retrospect, what's really, really strange is it really seemed like my friend knew where to go. And we just happened to take the right paved road that led to a gravel road, which led to a dirt road with a chain across it, with a sternly worded sign that said, do not keep out, keep out, do not enter, no hunting, no camping, no nothing, stay out. And I said, well, I guess we're going to have to turn around and find another way. And my friend said, no, wait a minute. And he was observant enough to see that what they'd done is just taken the lock and looped it around on itself with a padlock and draped it over the post on the opposing side of the road. So he says, man, I got this. And he hops out of the car, picks up the chain, lets it drop, and we're in, and we're thrilled. We're ecstatic. We feel like Lewis and Clark or something. So we drive on in, and we knew we were trespassing, but we thought we were in a nature preserve or something. I mean, what's the worst thing? We weren't going to leave a mess or hurt anything. What's the worst thing to do? They can throw us out. We can live with that. So the problem that we had was this plateau, and I can send you pictures of it if I haven't already. The top of the plateau is even with the tops of the trees. So unless you're right up on the thing, you can't see it. A friend of mine, as a matter of fact, his story is featured in the second part of my second book because he's an experiencer. He was also a U.S. government cartographer. And he got some of the photos from Google Earth. And from the time we entered the park, we would have had to make something like 20 correct right or left turns to have hit this place. Or we could have drove around for months and never found it. It's just a maze of little dirt back roads. So he was kind enough to map that out for me. I have a drawing that shows all the possibilities we could have gone wrong. And Toby chose the correct route every time. So that just belies credulity. I mean, I don't know how in the world that's what happened. And I might mention too, real quick, I had never looked for this place on Google Earth because it should be covered with 40-year-old mature trees by now, and it's not. It's still chained off. It's still no admittance. It's owned by the Bureau of Land Management. It's owned by the federal government, on lease to some individual's name, but BLM is the owner. And the top of this plateau is still cut. It's clear cut. They take a tractor up there. I had a follower on Facebook who got a hold of the Google Earth images, and he blew them up. And he claims that he can see, he's a landscaper by trade. He says he can see clear tractor marks, that this thing is cut with what's called a brush hog pulled behind like a farm tractor. And it's clear cut to keep the growth of trees down. And from a satellite view looking down, the thing is roughly triangular shaped, which is kind of crazy. In my book, I refer to it as being horseshoe shaped, but that was before I knew it was still deforested. So I guess the question that hangs is, why would the United States government spend all that money and burn all that gas for 50 years to keep the top of a plateau deforested in the middle of nowhere? So, so we made our way to the top, and it was gorgeous. It was a beautiful place, and full of late blooming wildflowers and grass about knee high or less, and just a nice place. And we had camped off to the side near the tree line. And, you know, we did all the fun stuff. I kind of cut through a lot of the, and get down to the event. You know, after we did all the fun stuff, we had set up camp, and we have a campfire between us. And my friend and I are sitting on the other side of the campfire between us. And, you know, we're just chatting. We're just kicked back and relaxed. And this was 9:00 at night. We probably had every reason to be a little tired, but we shouldn't have been sleepy because we were used to working the night shift. And I had noticed, and this sounds so cliche, I know, but this is true, that the sounds of the forest went silent. The crickets, the tree frogs, all that stuff. I mean, man, it was like being in a sound booth. Also, even the breeze that we had enjoyed earlier had stopped, and it was just still. And it unnerved me. I mean, had I been there by myself, I'd have been gone. But, you know, I wasn't going to do that. No, yeah, I wasn't going to do that. And I asked my friend, you know, is this cool? Is this normal? And he blows it off. He's like, yeah, man, don't worry about it. It's nothing to worry about. The bugs, we just, you know, we've been laughing and cutting up. They'll be back. Don't worry about the bugs. I'm like, okay. So I tried not to. And we have a little more just nonsense conversation. And I noticed that he's fixated on something to his left, which would have been to the left. And I am about to ask him, what are you looking at? When he says, hey, Terry, were those lights there before? And I knew there were no lights anywhere. I mean, we were in a remote location. It's built up a lot now. But the closest thing to us was the campsite. And we could maybe see a little glow on the horizon from the campsite, which was, you know, tiny by today's standards. But there were no lights around us. We were in a remote area. And I couldn't see them at first. I had to stand up and take a step back because his torso was in the way, blocking the image. And I could see there were a bundle of these, or there were 3 stars in a tight little triangle. And they were sitting just above the horizon. And they were too far above the horizon to have been lights from a parking lot or a train or something like that. And we didn't know what they were. You know, I thought it might be an airplane, you know, headed directly in our direction, and we couldn't sense motion until it would deviate a degree or two. So we watched it for a while, and several minutes passed. It didn't move, and then it did. What it did was it rotated like it were on an axis, and it aligned the bottom, the base of the pyramid or the triangle, parallel with the horizon. And then almost immediately started to move up. And it climbed up into the sky. And as it's climbing, it's the first time I felt this wave of calm wash over me. And it was a semi-sense of sedation. All that anxiety and unease that I felt earlier because of the place going so silent, that was all gone. And I was in a strange place. I don't know. Our emotions were inappropriate. They were muted. We should have had some level of anxiety or curiosity or something, but we didn't. I felt this mild disinterest and absolute calm. I felt more like an observer than a participant in what was going on. I felt detached, dissociated in some way, and we watched until this thing reached the ceiling, and I have no idea what that was. I had no point of reference. I would guess, 10 or 15,000 feet. And And as it's climbing into the air, it did some somersault movements where the apex would turn down under and the thing would do a somersault. And I remember the distinct feeling that, this thing is moving with purpose. It's not out of control. It's moving with purpose. And it was. And it was clearly headed in our direction. And it was kind of what I call, once it reached the ceiling, it moved down and came down like on a glide plane almost. We never heard any noise. The lights on the triangle, on the points, dimmed somewhat, and it kind of just slid in over the forest. And we're looking at the treetops from our elevated position, and it glided in at about 5,000 feet on the horizon, and then steadily declined or descended until it was at about 3,000 feet over the top of the plateau. And it slowed and came to a stop directly over the plateau. And had we camped where I wanted to set up camp right in the middle of the plateau. And if we'd done that, this thing would have been right over our heads. And Toby was insistent that we set up camp by the tree line, which was good fortune because then we were offset from it a bit. And it was enormous. And I don't understand to this day how this thing could not be seen in 3 counties. I mean, granted, in 1977, it was sparsely populated, but I mean, this thing was big. I say in the book that it was a city block on each length of the triangle. And, I would compare it to like a super Walmart. I mean, it was just enormous. And it was intimidating. But we didn't feel intimidated. We felt just neutral. And we sat there, and there's hardly a word said between us. I mean, I think I remember the only words that Toby said was, they're really moving now, in reference to the 3 points of light when it started to move up into the air. But after that, I don't recall any conversation. And once it's stopped, from underneath and from the center, a light came out of it. And it was about the diameter of a softball, maybe a little bigger, but it was a column of white light. And it was the same character as like a high power searchlight cuts through fog. You can see a visible white light. Of course, there was no fog, but that's the illusion that it gave. It had a visible quality to it. And it landed right in the middle of our campfire and stayed there for about 60 seconds and then turned off. And the second that it turned off, another light came on, just like someone hit a switch. And this was a laser-like thing. I had only seen lasers on TV in 1977, but I knew that's what this was. And it would land at a spot at the campsite and stay there for maybe 1/10 of a second, and then reappear in another spot, so that every second it would be in 10 different locations all over the campsite. So it gave the illusion this light was dancing all over the campsite. But its focus was on everything that Toby or I, or that we brought with us, like the car, the tent, the campfire, the cooler, his backpack, us personally. The light struck me in the chest at least twice. I never felt a thing. Never heard a thing. And that lasted for maybe 3 minutes. And then I had this wave of, that mild sedation kind of morphed into sleepy. And I felt, if you've ever been in a situation where all you want to do is lie down and go to sleep, that's what I was. That's where we both were at. And my friend picked up his air mattress, and he said, "Show's over." And I thought that was interesting. I didn't answer him. And he went over to our little, $10 Kmart pup tent and threw his air mattress inside and hopped on top of it. And I followed him and did the same. I threw my mattress in and fell on top of it. And I was out. The second my head hit the inflatable air mattress pillow, and I was gone. I had no dreams. It was very much like being under the influence of anesthesia, in that it was just black, and then all of a sudden, yep, exactly. And I wake up, and there are these lights flashing through the tent that are yellow and greenish and white. And they are at odd intervals, and they would flash really bright, like an old school flash bulb from a camera. And when they would flash, they would light up the inside of that tent for a millisecond. So they were very bright. And I wake up, and I don't have my wits about me. I'm kind of, where am I? Oh, yeah, we're camping. Yeah, Toby and I are camping. And I'm seeing these lights flash, and I'm thinking, these must be the overhead flashers of a park ranger's truck there to kick us out. That made sense. And I sat up, and I noted that my boots had been unlaced about 3/4 of the way down. Now, one of the things they teach you in the military is to take care of your feet, and I do to this day. I mean, I would never have done that. I would have taken my boots off. I kept them laced to the top, but I would not have done that. Because if something happened and you needed to run, it would be a trip hazard. And I wouldn't do that. And that confused me. It didn't scare me, but it confused me. And I took them off, and I put them on properly. And I noticed that my socks were on sideways. And I would never have done that. But it didn't dawn on me that someone had redressed me until later. And I get my boots laced, and I turn my attention to Toby. And I could see in this flash of white light, Toby was African American, and the saline in his tears down his side of his cheek would fluoresce against his dark skin whenever that light would flash through the tent. So I could see he'd been crying. And that unnerved me. And that really started to get me anxious. So he's on his knees, and he's peering out the flap on the side of his tent. So I'm like, Toby, man, what is it? Is it park rangers? Who's out there? And he did this and told me to be quiet. He said, shh, they're still out there. And I'm, who's still out there, Toby? And he didn't answer me. And I got to my knees, and I pulled back the flap of my tent about 1 inch. And when I looked out, I saw what looked like a dozen, maybe 15. I didn't count them. I wish I had. A dozen or 15 of these little guys that I took to be children. And we were far enough away that they weren't real plain to see. But when the points on the triangle would flash, that would illuminate the underside of this thing somewhat. Because it's only, at this point, when we went to bed, it was 3,000 feet over our heads. I want to be clear, it had descended and was now just 30 feet over the top of that meadow. So that's how we were able to get some perspective as to the size of it and the true depth of it. And I asked Toby, I said, Toby, man, what the hell are these kids doing out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? And he said, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. And he said, don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. And when he said that, it was just like a smack in the face. And I came out of it, and I was absolutely terrified. And I was scared to death that one of us were going to, would cough or sneeze or make some kind of inadvertent noise that would draw their attention. And, we had no way to know that they were long done with us. They'd done what they wanted to do and dumped us back off. And so we watched them. And while we're watching, there came another column of light from underneath this thing. And this was a column of white visible light about 30 feet in diameter. It was about as wide as this thing was off the ground. And it had that same visible white quality to it, this visible beam of light. And as soon as that clicked on, all these little guys that were walking around, and I saw what Toby meant. In the flashes of light, I could see these were not human beings. Their heads were disproportionate to their bodies, and they walked with a very unique gait. They walked almost like their legs were hinged to go backward, like 1.5 inches with each step. So in that regard, they kind of like dragged their leg from behind when they made a step forward. It was just weird to see. And as soon as the light clicked on, they all made their way toward this thing, this light, this column of light. And they would step into it in twos and threes. And within maybe 15, 20 seconds, they would just pixelate out and be gone. Very much like, and I've never been a science fiction fan. And the only reason I know this is my wife watched it when we were dating, the old Star Trek where they had the transporter ponder, whatever the hell it was called, the column, and the images of the characters would pixelate out, very much like that. So we watched until the last two guys disappeared. Then the light shut off, and there had been a droning noise from this thing. A noise that wasn't so much loud, but it was powerful. You could kind of feel it in your chest. It was. Have you ever stood next? If you've ever stood next to like a diesel locomotive that's idling, or a big piece of some kind of industrial machinery, you know the noise. It's not loud, but you can feel it in your chest, and that's what this was like. And that shut off. And the moment that shut off, the lights on all 3 points, of course we could only see two, but the lights in the triangle switched from multicolored to all white. And then it lifted off, and it didn't go off like a rocket. It just lifted off like a hot air balloon, and it went straight up. And we saw it, the higher it went, the faster it went, and it went from 3 visible lights to 1 light, and then, in a matter of seconds, it was gone. And we were so terrified. I was insistent. I said, look, let's stay here till dawn. And we had no idea what time it was. We both wore nice wind-up watches that were the standard of the day. I mean, they were integral to the job of being an EMT. You needed a good watch. Both of our watches had stopped at 2:40. So that had to be AM because they were working when we went to bed, I believe. And Toby wanted to get out of there, but I didn't want to make it I didn't want to run to the car. I didn't want to be, all I had over my head was a piece of canvas, but I felt like it gave me cover. And I didn't want to sacrifice that and be vulnerable in the run from the tent to the car. So I was content to stay there till dawn. But he was insistent that we get the hell out of there. And I asked him, I said, man, can you get me out of here without breaking an axle, in a 66 Impala, in terrain that's better suited for a Range Rover? And he's like, yeah, trust me, I got this. And he did. Now, I will say that he made some notes with a pencil on the back of a bank envelope that he found in my glove box when we were driving in. But it still baffles me how he was able to navigate us out of there in the middle of the night with so many turns and get us right back to Blacktop. We were both injured. We both, of course, Toby didn't sunburn, but he was burnt nonetheless. And I was burned. I had like the worst sunburn I'd ever had in my life, all over my body, under my arms, soles of my feet. I mean, everywhere I'm burned. And dehydrated, we were terribly dehydrated. I really was so thirsty. I can't explain it. And we made our way back to base. And coming up on the end here, I just want to say that we made a pact that we would not tell, because we knew we were sick enough we weren't going to have to go to the hospital. And that was kind of an embarrassment because we were members of the hospital squadron, and we wanted to be truthful. And so we decided that we would tell them that we went to bed feeling like hell and just woke up sicker than dogs and came home. Because when we left our tent, Toby's backpack, his nice Coleman cooler. We left everything. I took my wallet, my car keys. That's it. We didn't care about anything. We just wanted to get out of there with our lives. And that's what we did. So, reflection.
That I couldn't even imagine. And, the part of your book, when you you really wanted to not tell anybody, and you guys wanted to keep this a secret, but someone had other plans, and you were both kind of, were you summoned in the hospital? Did you get sick enough to go to the hospital, or were you summoned and then taken to the hospital?
When I got home, when I walked in the door, my wife was like, hey, you're back early. Whoa, what the hell happened to you? I must have looked rough. I said, what do we have to drink? I'm just so thirsty. And I just was pounding these glasses of powdered lemonade that she made for me. And she helped me get my boots off. And she's like, you're so sunburned. Why didn't you use sunscreen? Like, we weren't out in the sun, And she felt my forehead. She said, you're burning up with fever. And I was. My fever was over 103, which, for an adult is not healthy. So she got me a handful of aspirin, and I took 3 or 4, and she said, you're going to have to go to the hospital. And I said, I know. So, when we got to the hospital, curiously, they separated the two of us. I'm told are you familiar with Robert Hastings?
Yeah. Okay,
Robert's a friend of mine, and he's become a friend of mine. He wrote the foreword to the second book.
Okay.
A very nice, very kind foreword that's not in there yet. I have to, because he didn't have it done, and I wanted to push the book out in time for Christmas. So, but I'm going to include that. Robert and I talked for a long time in our first conversation, and he's like, so much of your story I've heard before. And he said, it's absolutely standard procedure for them to separate the two of you. He says, if 3 people see and he says, there's a little bit of difference in your story. He says, 2 guys on active duty see a saucer dart across the sky. They'll call them in, debrief them, interrogate them, and tell them, what you saw was probably an aircraft. We got ping of it on radar. It was an F-101, blah, blah, blah. Tell them a lie and give them a stern warning, don't talk about it. But our encounter was a little more intimate than that. And for people that have a little more intimate encounter, they immediately separate the two of them. I was ordered to have no contact with Toby, and likewise. And they cut orders for him to Japan. I mean, at light speed. He was, boom, gone. Just real quick, I should add, while I was in the hospital, OSI came, 2 OSI agents. OSI, of course, is the Office of Special Investigations. It's the investigative branch of the Air Force's security police. Kind of like NCIS is to the Navy, OSI is to the Air Force, if that makes sense for you folks. But I'm sure you know the difference. And this OSI agent, 2 OSI agents, came in while I was in the hospital and interrogated me and scared the hell out of me and read me my rights. Didn't accuse me of a crime, though. I'm 22 years old. I don't have the benefit of life experience. I don't have the benefit of a law degree. I mean, I'm just a young kid who'd never been in any trouble in his life. And I am thinking, oh my God, did we burn the forest down? That's the first thing I thought, and of course we didn't. What they did was park rangers found all our stuff. And I believe it's because we didn't put that gate back up on a chain. They knew someone had been in there. Toby had his name and address on base in his backpack, written in magic marker. And I think what they did was they probably called the base and said, hey, 2 of your airmen have been down here. And they got a little camp set up. Looks like they're planning on coming back. But moreover, I think that they knew. I think that the OSI, independent of whatever information they may have got from the Parks Department, they knew what we saw. And I know that because this guy and these guys interrogated me, and I mean, years later, I mean, having worked as a DA, I understand a little bit about police interrogation and the process of intimidation and how it works. And, they just kind of harassed me really for about 30 minutes, and then they left. But before the guy left, this agent in charge was a major, Major Gregory, and he got down next to my ear after his cohort left. And he whispered, he said, and he had this Alabama accent, you know, and he's like, son, if you've ever talked to Calvin Parker, you know what it's, he's got the same Calvin Parker kind of accent. And he says, son, I know, and you two knuckleheads stumbled onto something while you were out there. And I think you know what I mean. And I didn't know how to answer him. So I didn't. And he said, oh yeah, I know you know what I'm talking about. And I mean, it was common knowledge among the hospital squadron that I was an amateur photographer, you know. And the hospital commander had one of my prints hanging up in his office, you know, so I mean, it was well known. So, and this OSI agent says, all I want to know is how many pictures you took of it. And, you know, without thinking, I blurted out, sorry, I never took a single picture. And he just smiled, because that was an admission. You know, he got me. I mean, that was good interrogation technique. He got me. So he said, I don't believe you, and packed up his stuff and left. So they knew. I don't know how they knew. They knew.
You know, what's interesting about that, and we talked a little bit on our phone call about Rick Doty. And I had a conversation with Rick, who was with OSI, and he was read in 78, just a year after your incident. And so Rick was telling me about, and he may have shared this with you, about an incident with a lady in New Mexico who was abducted. And Rick never dealt with abductions, but the guy, he was doing his OSI thing with, I guess you'd call it an informant, someone he's working with that was a private citizen that was reporting things, and he did what OSI does and got in with him. This guy brought him a gal that had an abduction case, and so he thought it'd be worth talking to her. And when he's talking to her, she describes being taken to an underground facility near Kirkland Air Force Base called Coyote Canyon that no one knows about. There's no way she's going to know about it. She described the inside of that facility perfectly, enough to where he was so taken aback, he went out to Kirkland, got a host to take him downstairs just to look at everything. Everything matched exactly. VATS, the elevator, the platform for nuclear launch, and these portals she kept talking about. And he didn't see those, but he did see one, and he said it's an escape hatch. And it shook him up, so he went back and talked to her just to make sure. Have you ever been in the military? Have you had friends of the military? Just on and on. And it was clear. It was clear to him she hadn't. It was clear to him there was something going on. So he files a report. Well, it goes to the DIA. He didn't know that. He put it to his boss. 2 DIA guys show up.
Yeah.
And they said, we came to talk about your report. And he said, okay. And he said, before we start, what department within the DIA are you? And they looked at him straight in the face, said, the abduction department. And he said, the government has an abduction department. And they said, yeah. And they weren't playing around. 2 hours later, he was debriefed into that program. Yeah. And not that he spent a lot of time involved with those cases, but because this was one like that. And Rick was an example of, the OSI guys that did to you a year previously, what he was briefed into to do, the next 10 years. So, people talk about men in black. Well, it's they don't have to be in black, but there's investigative arm that's their function. So yeah, it sounds like at 22 years old, you had a rude awakening into that world.
I did. I don't tell many people this, but it was a change. It changed my life. And I think that Toby and I both were two different people when we came back from that trip. And also something changed between us. This guy was my best friend, and now I wanted nothing to do with the guy. And I can't reconcile that. I don't know. I think that speaks to the level of influence that they have over us and our emotion. I didn't want to be around the guy. Yeah. And so when I heard that they were shipping him to Japan, I thought, well, that's fine. I didn't want to be around him. I didn't care for him. I couldn't rationalize it, but I felt a really strong compulsion to stop by and tell him goodbye and wish him well. I don't know if I told you this when we spoke last time or not. Okay, then it's brief. I asked my wife one day to drop me by Toby's house on her way home from the base grocery store. And she was driving. It was her Carmen Gia. And I said, park out front. I just want to run in. I want to say goodbye to Toby. And I need to do this. It's unfinished business. I need to shake his hand and tell him goodbye and wish him well. And I thought that would give me some measure of peace with this thing. That was my expectation anyway. But it didn't work out that way. And I went up to the door, the same door I'd walked through 100 times before. And as was my usual habit, I knocked on the door, opened the door, and said, "Hey guys, it's me." And just kind of stepped in. And Toby's wife walked by me, and they were packing. And she had, I think it was a lamp in her hand. Something, may have been a box, but I think it was a lamp. And she said, "You're not supposed to be here." And I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "I'm not here to confront anybody. I just want to say goodbye to Toby." And Toby must have heard our exchange because he came around the corner from the bedroom. And I looked at him and I just felt stunned because he looked like hell. He did. He was one of these guys who was always so meticulous about his appearance. He was always clean shaven, always had his hair cut within regs, always had a really crisp starched uniform, shined his shoes, kept slim, did everything that I didn't do. I was the slob in the duo, but he was always just spot on. And he was unshaven. His hair was all sideways. He had on a dirty T-shirt, barefoot, dirty jeans. And I'm thinking, the guy's moving. I can cut him some slack for that. And he walked up to me, and it felt awkward. It didn't feel like the same friend that I knew just a couple weeks earlier. And I held out my hand, and he held out his, and we did this really inelegant handshake that we finally, and I said, "Hey man, I just want to wish you well." I mean, I felt it'd been appropriate to embrace the guy, but I didn't. And he was shorter than I am, and he looked up at me and he said, "It happened, didn't it, Terry?" And I said, "Yes, my brother, it really happened, and you're not losing your mind." And he's looking up at me, and I could smell liquor on his breath. And his eyes are like road maps. And I've never seen him. I'd never seen the man drunk. I'd never seen him drink more than a beer, maybe a beer and a half. And he said, "Yeah, but why us?" And I said, "Man, I don't have a expletive clue." And I broke my gaze with him. I looked down at my shoes, and I just felt overwhelmed with panic. And I ran out the front door and got in the car, and we went home. But that did not give me the measure of peace that I'd hoped for. It was not a positive experience. And again, I think that that's not my human nature or his. I think that speaks again to the level of influence that non-human entities have over us.
Yeah. And I know Toby met somewhat of an unfortunate end. It sounded like his life he never gained a semblance of a foothold back in the real world. And it's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. And wow. Well, one thing I did want to ask before we go today anyway, was before any of this happened, before you joined the service and when you were a child, there's some reference in your book of you seeing some things in your room as a youth. How was describe that if you could? I can.
And really, it goes back earlier than I say in the book. It goes back to probably age 4. Some of the things that I had to say are so outrageous that I really was concerned, and including them in the book would damage my credibility. Because, you're asking people to believe a lot. And, but, for the sake of honesty, I wanted to include as much as I felt the public could digest. So yeah, my memory goes back to age about 4, and they would take me as a kid, and I would go to this room with these other kids, and it was always the same other kids, and there were maybe 10 of us, and we would play in this big domed room, white domed room, and there was always the same woman there, kind of in charge. And at the time, back then, I called her Sue. Now, I'm only 4 years old, but I knew a woman named Sue who happened to be petite and Asian, who was a neighbor. So in my mind's eye, I'm thinking, well, she's like Sue, I'll call her Sue. And that was my name for her. And that's the same entity as Betty that came to visit me in 2017. No doubt. Same one and the same. And I think that's why I felt such a strong maternal feeling for her, is because she took care of us when I was a little kid. And I had memories of being in there, and we were given these geometric forms that she would ask us to put into they were different colors, ask us to put them into certain arrangements. And when we did, she'd give us high praise. If we didn't, she'd, very patiently sit down and show us how to do it properly. And one of the exercises she had us do, and I don't remember if I put this in the red book or not, The Reckoning, but I meant to. And that is that we had these geometric shapes. I had a cube. Some people had pyramids. Some people had globes. They were all different colors. Mine was a blue cube, and it weighed absolutely nothing. It had zero mass. I mean, I could hold it out and drop it, and it would fall to the floor. But to pick it up, it didn't weigh anything. And what she would do is we were sitting like cross-legged on the floor, facing the wall, and we would set this object in front of us, and she wanted us to move it with our minds. And the whole time we were on this, I was on this thing, we spoke telepathically. And it just seemed very natural when I was there. And I couldn't do it. I tried several times and failed. And then on one event, I was concentrating on it real hard for it to move, and it just flew. And it flew across maybe 6 feet or so. But she came over and gave me high praise for that. And so you really, really did good. And then I thought, oh boy, I'll be able to do that back home. But, of course, it never worked on this planet. I don't know where we were. I think we were on some craft of some kind. I talk in Incident at Devil's Den about seeing the monkey men in my room. And, in the back of Devil's Den, I think I told you this, I put a email address and said, if you had a like experience and you'd like to talk to somebody, 1,500 people or more have contacted me. But I'm not the only one to have experienced that, being taken at age 4, 5, 6, 7. And, people have these experiences, and they write to me, and, the demographics are interesting because I took all these letters, all these emails, and I did an Excel spreadsheet looking for commonalities. And the demographics kind of surprised me. Most of the people that responded to me with credible stories were 50 years old or older. And the common theme was, I had this really crazy dream from when I was 4 or 5. I can't remember the birthday parties or vacations, but I can remember this dream from 4 or 5. And, I think that it's very telling. So I don't think it was a dream.
No, and that struck me too. When we talked the other day and you were talking about that age demographic, and it kind of occurred to me that maybe you get to a point in your life where something like yourself with your leg and you're running and this implant, and it just prompted you to say, you know what, I wasn't going to say anything, but now I am. And you were just retired, right? So you didn't have to face, putting it out there and then representing people or, being an attorney. And I wonder if
being ostracized from the legal community would have been the end of my career.
Because it sounds like that demographic is retirement age for the most part. And maybe people are, I've held this my whole life. I just don't give a, you know what now. I'm coming out with it. And then the other question that dawned on me as well, and we talked a little bit about that, and this kind of ties into, we talked about your childhood and obviously the incident at Devil's Den, and then the same entity, I know in 2017, paid you a visit. Anything in your life, adult life, that same time frame, maybe 50 years till now, is there anything that continues to happen, or do you think in some way you were part of a process for them up until a certain age, and then with maybe the people that have reached out to you, is there any commonality there in the age bracket, 50 years on? Do they still have things going on, or does it seem like it's almost been that process from childhood till your prime, and certain years later, it's not so much?
Very, very few people, only a handful, wrote to me and said, I had this one major event. And I wrote back and I said, are you sure, that you don't have other memories? I said, I'm not looking for you to make something up, but I said, I need a candid reply. And I either didn't get an answer, or I got an answer in the negative. But for most of us, people that have had experience at this level of intimacy are experiencers for a lifetime. If we do have the chance to get together, I have some photographs. I can show you the originals on my phone. I've been seeing UFOs in the sky all my life. I saw two. I saw one when I was 8 years old, 1963. I saw a saucer in my backyard. That's in Devil's Den. And then at age 11, I had the same experience. And then what's interesting is, I was age 11, and then 10 years later, roughly, in 1977, I had the experience. And then 10 years later, in 1987, I had the experience. And I had, odd dreams and, minor experiences throughout. One of the things my wife and I have been plagued with, and we'll be together 47 years, March 15th. So, we know one another very well. And one of the things we share in common is every place we've ever lived, we've had poltergeist-like activity in our home. Our TV will turn on in the middle of the night. Our kids, they were out of college, but they came down. My daughter was still just graduating from high school. Anyway, our kids spent time with us when we were in Samoa. And they saw some crazy stuff. They saw bunny lights, and they believed that the house was haunted as hell. They really did. And we've had those kind of things before. I've also had increased intuition. That's come in handy a lot.